morning and welcome to Southwark and Southwark Chamber of Commerce's Business Support Webinar. This is the first time we're with you here in Southwark, and we're delighted to bring together this morning a group of experts that are hopefully going to give you the answers that you need about how to bring your business forward out of lockdown into the new normal that we're also much looking forward to entering. However, there are lots of challenges. There have been many challenges for businesses over the last 8 weeks, and I'm sure there are more to come. And hopefully this morning we can help you with some of your concerns. We can give you some advice, and we can hopefully encourage you to move forward and grow, and for your businesses to once again thrive. Now, this morning we are running this on behalf of the Southwark Chamber of Commerce and also the Southwark Business Excellence Awards. And hopefully many of you watching will have been past winners or entries to the awards. And we do have our award programme, which we launched with such positivity earlier this year. And we were very much hoping that by now we could have awarded those prizes. Obviously, with the current state, we can't. And one of the reasons that we're bringing this series to you in your home is to encourage you all to stay engaged, to be part of the Southwark business community. And Les, who is the chair of Southwark Chamber, is going to say a few words about that shortly. I'm just going to introduce to you who I have with me today. I have a great panel. There is literally something for everyone here this morning. First of all, Andrew Sharnock, who runs the HR department based here in Southwark. He's going to be talking to us about those challenges around our employees. So that's furloughing, so that shouldn't they take holiday. That's also what should we be doing about this test and trace announcement that's been made. What impact might that have for our businesses if our employees are involved in that scheme? Also with us is Alan Seffart from Anthony Gold Solicitors. Now, Anthony Gold are a firm supporter of the Southwark Chamber of Commerce and have been for many years. They sit on our board, and Anthony is here and can be talk to you particularly this morning, giving you some legal help and advice, maybe about your rent situation, how you should maybe try and negotiate a rent holiday or a rent review, and other issues such as contracts. How do you, as an SME, how do you deal with the situation of terminations of contracts? So anything in the legal spectrum, Alan is here to help you with that this morning. Also here is Andrew Tate from Creston Reeves. Now, Creston Reeves is a name I'm sure many of you will know. They're a large accountancy practice, and Andrew's job particularly is about restructuring. Now, that's something that we've all, I'm sure, as small businesses, had to think about in the last 8 weeks. And very importantly, how are our businesses going to look as we move out of lockdown and we restart? And Andrew can give some help and guidance about what we should all be thinking about in terms of what the future might look like, how we maybe should be looking at pivoting our businesses to look at new opportunities, and what impact that might have for our finances. So any questions around that, please do talk to Andrew this morning. Also with us is Jennifer O'Donnell. Now, Jennifer runs the Jane Jefferson Cleaning Company. Now, really importantly, Jane runs a small business in Southwark, has been massively affected by the coronavirus, as many of you have. And she brings this morning a perspective of how she's coping, what she's doing, and how actually COVID-19 has given her an opportunity to be innovative about her business and actually think about how she moves forward. Jennifer, like many of you, is about to consider unfurloughing her staff. How is she going to do that, and what is that really going to mean? Slightly later, at around 10:30, we will be welcoming Danny Edwards, who's from the Southwark Council. Danny is in the economic development team, and he will just be giving you an update from a council perspective of how the council can be supporting and can continue to support businesses in this borough. So we've got a lot of people here with a lot of information they want to share with you. Importantly, this morning, what we want to do is to hear from you. And we want to hear your questions. So actually, this morning you have the opportunity to talk directly to our panel, and you can do that a number of ways. So in your taskbar, those of you that are watching, you have a Q&A button. And that's where, if you open that button, you can put your question to any of our panelists, and that will allow me to ask your question on your behalf. Now, if you're feeling brave this morning, we'd love you to actually come on and ask your question in person. And you can do that by giving me a virtual wave. So next to your name, you'll see the little button that you can press, and that tells me that you're waving at me. And that means I can invite you into the conversation. I can open up your microphone and you can actually ask your question in person. And I've already got Oliver who's waving at me, which is fantastic. Thank you, Oliver. I will come to you. So please do look at that. We also have a chat button. This is really important. Open up this chat button, put it to the side of your screen so that you can be keeping your eyes on what people are chatting about this morning. So in addition to hearing what people are saying, you can put your comments, your thoughts, your questions into the chat button, and you can talk to the panelists directly. Now, we are recording this morning, so this video will be online on the Southwark Chamber's website, as well as lots of other information that is needed at this time. So before we start the main part of this morning, I'm going to invite Les Johnson, who's the chair of the Southwark Chamber of Commerce, to just give us a bit of an oversight and a welcome from the Chamber's perspective. So Les, lovely. Hi Les.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, welcome everyone on behalf of Southwark Chamber of Commerce, and a big thanks to White Label, Catherine, Julie and her team for facilitating this, putting it together, and also thanks to all of our esteemed panellists for giving up their time and also, in coming on the screen to share their experience and advice, really. And also many thanks to the people that have joined us as well, giving up their time, and hopefully you will find it of some benefit. I'm not sure whether we've got to invent new words like, are we Zoomers, are we Zoomies? I don't quite know, but there's a lot of new language I feel that has to become, or perhaps it's already there, I don't know really. So obviously the Chamber primarily is here to support local business, and we are a membership organisation, so we rely on our members to actually make us function really to do that. We're having to look for a new way of networking. We've had many events in the past which have involved experts coming to talk to us about many matters of finance, HR. We've also had our annual boat cruise, which obviously has been suspended this year, although we do understand that some companies are now trying to put together virtual cruises down the Thames, which I think is quite an innovative way and great to hear that as well, really. So we are looking at doing these webinars, and this is great that we've got these ideas coming through on how can we interact. And again, I know White Label have got their big breakfast or a virtual breakfast, which is a monthly thing we're involved with, which gives people the opportunity to get involved and talk about whatever they want to talk about, what they've had for breakfast, what they're going to have for breakfast, what the day holds in store for them, plus business as well, really. We have a link with London local chambers, which I go to now virtual meetings, which is a great wealth of information coming through. So I found that very useful, giving lots of link. And actually, we may have lots of criticisms with the government, but there is actually a lot of information on their websites, and there must be people who are burning midnight oil to keep updated. There's always going to be things you disagree with, but that's more, I think, of a policy and a strategy issue rather than actually get the information out there. The Health and Safety Executive have got a good big pack as well. So there's a lot of information out there, but I may fade away, as Catherine knows, because I live in the sticks, and what this has shown to me is how poor our infrastructure is, that we are relying so much these days on telephone working and the internet, and that's caused lots of problems, really. We have great links with LSBU and other universities where we can get information through their business school. That's great. So I think I've probably gone on enough now, so I'll hand back to Catherine and look forward to interaction and hearing what this morning event's going to bring forward. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Les. You certainly are in the sticks, but we did manage to hear that, so that's wonderful. Thank you. And just to add my thoughts that please do support your local chamber. Really important in these current times to all work collectively and collaboratively to try and help each other, and that's really what this morning is about. So I'm going to move on now and ask Andrew Sharnett from the HR department. Andrew, the biggest issue for many of us at the moment appears to be furloughing and what we should be doing with our staff. I know you must have been hugely busy and you will remain so, but just give us an update from your perspective, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much and good morning to everybody. Yes, I've been going into this phase now, obviously, about unfurloughing staff. And I've been working with companies recently who've been asking a lot of questions about how they can do that and if they should be doing that. And some companies are still deciding about how they can do that and if they can do that. And then you go into the whole area about restructuring as well, potentially, which is obviously what we're trying to avoid by having having the furlough system. So I think companies should be thinking about how they unfurlough employees. That depends on what their furlough agreement is, first of all, but it should be fairly straightforward. But the important thing is to remember how to allow people to be more flexible when they start to return. Certainly in terms of the timing of the work, the start and finish times, and the content of their work. And that will depend on obviously the customer demand from the particular businesses that are trying to get themselves back to some kind of normality. So you should look at job responsibilities. I think particularly from a legal point of view, if they're worried about that, I mean, a lot of it is about engagement, having a real good engagement with the employees. And this sort of situation has obviously allowed companies to look at things differently, and it's a real opportunity to be more engaging with staff, because you'll have to do so. Certainly in terms of the logistics of people travelling to work, for instance, and how they're going to do that, because there's a great shortage of seats, for instance, from travelling outside of central London. So start and finish times, shift work potentially that you've probably never had before could be important, and also the whole issue about managing holidays in terms of how do you do that. The government announced obviously that people could have a 2-year period to carry over, but a lot of companies don't want to do that, and they're concerned about how employees might come in with a set view in their mind. It is important to remember that you can insist that people take leave, but there'll be situations where you will have to give a certain amount of notice. For instance, if you want somebody to take at least a week's leave in the summer, then you're going to have to give them at least 2 weeks notice of it. So you need to plan carefully about how you do that and how you interact with your employees on that matter.
And Andrew, can I just pick you up on that particularly, because I know this is something that a lot of companies are realising. They've got furloughed staff who potentially might not be back before the autumn. And therefore, just to be clear, it is perfectly acceptable for a business to ask their employees who are furloughed to take holiday during furlough.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that is what you would be recommending, so that you haven't got this scenario of suddenly everyone coming back and having lots of
before and after. Before and after, actually. But yes, even while people are on furlough at the moment, you can require them to take leave.
Yeah.
But I think if you're not careful, it can be a bit heavy-handed in terms of how you handle it. So taking care really to properly engage with staff, and explain that it's for the business and the need for that flexibility to be introduced during the furlough period. Yeah. Important to remember is, if you need to probably help with selling that, is that if people do take leave, then they're paid the full 100%. So you now have to top up the 20% if they're on the 80% furlough payment.
Yeah. So there is an advantage. They will get more money. They'll get that extra 20% if they're only being paid 80%.
Correct. That's right.
But I guess from a financial perspective, that's something that needs to be considered as well. When you're financial planning your business, you need to take that into account.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and there may be difficulties with that. Some businesses are obviously furloughed everybody, perhaps.
Yeah.
For the very reason they've got a lack of income coming in. It's how they address that particular point about leave and topping up. But I think there's still a period going to come where businesses are going to think about how they potentially restructure their business in terms of headcount, for instance, and even get to the point where they may be out of business. And in terms of that, what you can and can't do during furlough includes having conversations about putting people at risk, for instance. That is absolutely allowed during the furlough period.
Can I just pick up on, just for clarification for those that are watching, the furlough scheme obviously has been extended. We know that to the end of October. I'm not sure yet whether we've had official clarification from the government in terms of in August there's a suggestion that employers are going to be asked to pay 25% plus PAYE costs towards furlough staff. What's the latest on that?
I don't know anything more than you do, I'm afraid, in
Right.
terms of that. But certainly I know that to the end of June, the current protection scheme is in place. Beyond that, it's then trying to introduce some kind of part-time arrangement, in terms of from a cost point of view. But I don't know any more than I'm afraid you do in terms of the from August onwards, or
That's
from
good.
July onwards. Sorry, but it's till the end of October.
Okay, so I'm aware there's lots of HR issues, but at this point, I just wanted to bring Andrew Tate in from Creston Reeves, because this subject of unfurloughing, not furloughing, topping up, not topping up, this will have a huge impact in terms of restructuring and business planning for the future. So, what are you finding, and what's your advice on this at the moment?
Thank you. Yes, it becomes really very, very difficult, I think, for businesses to actually plan what their cost base is over this period where certainly the rules keep changing, and there are lots of different options for businesses. We've heard of various businesses taking different measures to try and keep their cost base under control. So we've got furloughing. You've got lots of issues around that as to whether if someone is earning under roughly £40,000, then most of their costs can be covered by the furlough arrangements, obviously subject to the 80% limit. You've got businesses which have asked their people to take, perhaps go down to short-time working, to part-time working, to be able to reduce the salary costs, but actually to still maintain the business continuity. On furloughing, obviously, employees are unable to work for the business, and we believe that HMRC will be looking very closely to make sure that firms have really adhered to that. So there's lots of different options, and actually, I mean, one of the things that I have spoken to our clients about a lot is actually modelling the business. So coming up with cash flow forecasts, with profit forecasts for a business, to see just what the future looks like. It's very difficult without a spreadsheet modelling what the income of the business is, what its expenditure is going to be. It's really difficult to predict what cash flow is going to look like, and obviously no business wants to run out of money simply because they haven't projected what funds they need. We've also heard, and one of the schemes which the government has put into place is the business interruption loans, which the banks have been administering. This government-backed loan scheme, and the banks have been requiring businesses to put in projections to show that they have thought about what cash flow they need, what their profit is likely to look like, and that can be quite a complicated exercise. That's the thing. For even quite a simple business, trying to detail what income is going to come in. It's not just what invoices you can raise, but when are they going to be paid? How quickly a supplier is going to want to be paid? Everybody is trying to preserve their cash as much as possible. So trying to predict when suppliers need to be paid, and how much money you need from the bank to be able to get through the next few months is quite tricky. But the key to it is forecasting, and ideally to put a forecast together, which is what in the accountancy world we called an integrated forecast, which is essentially a balance sheet, a profit and loss, and a cash flow, all talking to each other so that you can see what cash you're going to need, what the profitability of the business is, and then ultimately what your balance sheet looks like at the beginning and the end of that.
Great. I've got a question actually for you, Andrew. It's using an acronym that I don't recognise, but I'm sure you will. We've all got very used to acronyms, haven't we? Will the SEISS be extended?
Thank you. It's a very good question, and obviously it's sort of crystal ball time. So the scheme that we're talking about there is the self-employed income support scheme. So it's the equivalent of furloughing support, which the government have given to self-employed people. It has been talked about in the press recently about a cliff edge coming up. because the support is due to end imminently. And unlike the furlough scheme, where the government has announced that it will be extended to the end of September, they haven't made a similar announcement for self-employed people. And at the beginning of the crisis, when lockdown started, the government was very quick to announce the furlough scheme. The support for self-employed businesses came much later, and that announcement came through. So I think that we are expecting that there will be an announcement by the Chancellor on that very, very shortly. I personally find it very difficult to see how he can't continue to support self-employed businesses when he has provided that extension for furloughed employees. But I think that just like the furlough scheme, we can expect that to see that taper off as we go through perhaps July into August and September. That would be my prediction anyway.
Okay, so the message really is to start planning. I guess, we're all excited about the fact we might be able to reopen our businesses, but actually taking some time to actually think about how that might look. And also very aware that many bills have been able to be, put on a sort of a hold scenario. But at some point, the reality is that those bills are going to need to be paid. So actually forecasting that ahead, probably be well into next year. Andrew, would you say?
That is absolutely right. I mean, so much the furlough scheme and local authority grants, they're grants to people. They don't need to be paid back, and that's a fantastic help from the government, and we've all understood that is costing billions of pounds. But actually there are lots of other costs which, as you say, are just being deferred. So rent payments that may not have been made in March, on the quarter day in March, they have been deferred, and I know that Alan is going to talk a little bit about landlords, so I won't sort of dip into that area. But certainly so many of these of our costs have been deferred, and the government has given legal protection for businesses to allow them to build up that without risking their directors' duties and their directors' liabilities. But ultimately they have to be paid off, and really modelling for the future is so important. I mean, just to finish that off, I've been talking to lots of businesses, shops, restaurants, and they have, they're really struggling to see how actually they're going to be able to get back to profitability, because their income obviously has been impacted by lockdown and the closure of the business. But even coming back with social distancing, a restaurant that has covers and has seating will really struggle to get the same number of people through the door. Therefore, what does that mean for their business model? And unfortunately, a lot of businesses are really struggling with that at the moment. So projecting what that reduced income might look like, the impact on the profitability and then the cash flow, is just so important. And certainly business advisors, may be needed to actually help with that.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you. I'm going to bring Alan in. Alan is from Anthony Gold. And I know this subject, Alan, of the whole rent issue with your landlords. There hasn't been any sort of overarching government guidance, really. It is down to the individual business, as I understand it, to see what they can negotiate. So what's the advice that you're giving at the moment, Alan?
Thanks, Catherine. The government has brought in the Coronavirus Act 2020, which has given some relief to business tenants, in the sense that landlords are now restricted from recovery action they can take for tenants who are in arrears with their rent or are struggling to pay the rent. And as Andrew said, the issue mostly arose on the 25th of March, when for most leases the March quarter rent became payable in advance. And what the Act says is that a landlord cannot take certain action to enforce arrears of rent. In particular, they can't take forfeiture action, in other words, action to repossess the property. They can't take rent recovery arrears action, so that would be sending in a sort of certified bailiff to seize the tenant's goods, to realise those goods in order to pay outstanding rent. And they can't commence insolvency proceedings, which would normally be commenced by issue of a statutory demand giving the tenant 21 days to pay. Otherwise, what would follow would be bankruptcy or liquidation proceedings. So there's a sort of moratorium, if you like, on action a landlord can take, but that at the moment lasts until I think it's the 30th of June. But the government may, and this will be interesting to see what they do. The Secretary of State can bring in further regulations extending that moratorium for another quarter or for whatever. So, but the advice at the moment to both landlords and tenants really is to communicate with each other as far as possible and try and see what compromise can be made, because it's in both the interests of the landlord, who doesn't particularly in this climate want to be left with potentially empty space and no tenant, and is going to struggle to re-let it, and equally the tenant needs probably time to pay. So if they can try and negotiate either a deferral of the rent, in other words, putting it back until the business can get back on its feet, maybe after the end of June, and some arrangement would then need to be made as to how those rent arrears, which will have accrued, how is that going to be repaid? Maybe via monthly instalments over a period of time or whatever. Tenants need to bear in mind that interest under the lease is probably accruing as well. I mean, a more generous landlord might think it's in their interest to offer a complete waiver of the rent for a period of time, a rent payment holiday. And certainly from a tenant's point of view, if you can negotiate that, that's even better. So really it's up to the two parties to try and negotiate as far as possible. But,
so that sort of communication message is key. We did hear yesterday, we were on a Southwark Chamber committee meeting, and British Land told us that they have agreed that they would give what they're calling a forgiveness term for 3 months to all their small businesses. So they are actually just waiving rent for 3 months, which I think is an amazing initiative. But sadly, that isn't the case for most landlords. Most landlords are unable to be that generous. So it is about talking to your landlord and trying to negotiate what's best. I'll come back to you, Alan, because I know there's a lot of other legal issues, but I wanted to bring Jennifer in because Jennifer, you are a small business based in Southwark, and what you're listening to is probably everything that you've experienced, and you are about to come out of lockdown. So can you just talk to us a little bit about that and give us your insight into that?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So Jones Jefferson Cleaning is a contract cleaning business, but we predominantly service event spaces and galleries, although we do offices and other sites, but they are the biggest source of our income. And earlier on in March, which seems such a long time ago now, I feel like I've lived 10 lives since the beginning of March. Early in March, I just felt like I was falling from a tall building. I'm sure lots of people can relate to that feeling. And I was in pure panic. I was just like, what am I going to do? All these people are pulling out, my income's going down. And I had this spinning feeling at the same time as I've got to sort this out. There is no way I'm going to let my business go under. I've put nearly 7 years of pure dedication into this. I'm just not going to let this happen. And then I'd start spinning again. But I dealt with the immediate. I think the furlough scheme obviously changed. It was a game changer for most companies. And then once everything had settled down, we furloughed 70 staff. I really started to think about what am I going to do now? And I think probably for the first time in my life, I listened to other people. I'm so single-minded. I'm like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. But for the first time, I took other people's advice. Even when I was out walking my dog, people would speak to me. Everybody wanted to help. They wanted to offer their advice and their experience. And I took things that people said, and there were a few things that people said that really made me think. One was I didn't want to take out the business interruption loan because I didn't want to get into further debt. I thought, why do I want to take that on? And then I spoke to a guy that was in banking, and he said, take it. It's a really brilliant loan. Just take it. Even if you don't use it, it is there. And now I'm so pleased it's there because there is so much that I could do with that, and I've started planning for that now. But also, you know, he said, don't panic. Only if you panic, the only thing panic is going to do is going to put you in hospital, which I think I was close to. But you can't panic. Panic doesn't help anything. And something else somebody said was diversify. So I really started to think about what are the other opportunities that I could get out of this. And I know this doesn't apply for every business, and I really feel for some businesses, but there are things that we all can be doing in terms of, I haven't networked like I have networked now. Networking wasn't my thing. I would avoid it. And now I talk to people and everybody wants to help them in contact with people I wasn't in contact with 10, 20 years ago. And everybody wants to offer their advice. And LinkedIn is amazing. Use LinkedIn as much as possible. Connect with as many people. I started using LinkedIn just a little bit, and already out of that I've had 5 tenders come on my doorstep, which is just amazing. I've actually never had that before in such a short amount of time. And diversification, we suddenly decided that, do you know what, and I can probably hear you all saying it, she's got a cleaning company, everybody needs cleaners. Obviously I didn't think of that at the time, but we're now looking at lots of different kind of cleaning solutions. We're presenting the businesses. We will come in to your offices or to your site and we will do a full risk assessment. We will look at all the high touch point areas, all the areas that are high risk, that are low risk, and we will come up with a proposal to you that has lots of different kinds of solutions. I've talked before on here about there's a lacquering antibacterial paint that's got a guarantee for 2 years, which can be put on all high touch point areas. Once that's on, you don't even need to clean, it only needs to be cleaned with a microfiber cloth and a bit of water. So if you can somehow communicate, I think what's going to be really important is that for your workers and for any visitors to your site or your clients, that they feel comfortable going into your premises. So if you have done everything you possibly can and you've communicated that to them, so I think this is key, signage is key, this is what we have done here to protect you, then I think workers, visitors, clients are going to feel a lot more comfortable.
Right, now that's a really uplifting story of the journey that you've been on, which I'm sure lots of people listening, I know I can relate to everything that you've said, but a very positive outlook in terms of pivoting and changing the business to adapt to the current situation. I'm just going to welcome Danny. Hi, Danny. Danny Edwards from Southwark Council. Thanks for joining us. I'll come to you in just a moment. Just want to go back to Andrew. We've got a question around furloughing and maternity, paternity scenarios. I can't unmute you. Oh, lovely. There we go, Andrew. Hi. Can you answer that question for us? What is the situation with paternity and maternity? Can you take that? Is that still applicable during furlough?
Well, I think furloughing is, as a minimum, is in 3-week periods. So what I would do is, if there's somebody wants to take maternity or paternity, unfurlough them during the end of a 3-week period, and therefore it would be acceptable to them to do so.
But other than that, you would have to, if they were on maternity, would you then have to top them up and pay to 100% if they were officially taking maternity or paternity?
They're unlikely probably to be on that, because it's not. They won't be on 100%. It depends on where they fall within how it matches with the 80% on a furlough. But right. Normally, if they're either on furlough or they're on maternity or paternity leave, and you pay accordingly to whatever maternity or paternity rules apply for that individual. Okay,
that's great. Coming over to Danny then. Hi, Danny. I'm sure you and your team have been exceptionally busy over the last 8 weeks. And I think what people are keen to know about, and I already have a question for you actually, which is about rates and council tax. What's currently happening in the current situation? What's the council doing? Are you able to give us some insight into that at the moment?
I'll tell you what I can. Thank you very much for inviting me this morning. Big apologies from Councillor Cryan. I spoke to her this morning. She really didn't sound well at all. So she's very sorry she can't be with you this morning. So I'm afraid you're stuck with me. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Danny Edwards. I manage the council's local economy team. So in the normal world, we have responsibility for the delivery of the council's economic wellbeing and skill strategies, and a big focus on business. In the current world, everything we are doing at the moment is just around business hardship, actually. I mean, this is an unprecedented time for all of us, and a time of real struggle, actually, for a lot of our businesses in the borough, particularly our small and micro businesses, but businesses of all sizes. And so the work of my team has just been almost wholly taken up with kind of supporting local businesses to respond to that challenge and that crisis. A lot of what we are doing is around providing up-to-date information, advice and guidance for Southwark businesses. The Southwark Business Coronavirus web pages are updated on a regular basis with all the latest up-to-date information on the government schemes that are available, including the small business grants and the retail and hospitality grants, and more recently the discretionary grant that was announced, and I'll can't talk more about that in a moment. Things like the job retention scheme and the self-employment income support scheme as well. All the latest up-to-date information is on there. We're also doing regular mail outs to over 4,000 businesses, and that is every business that we know and is engaged with any part of the council. We've collated all of that information, and we've been sending out regular information. The biggest challenge for business has been sort of finance and cash flow, and so Southwark was one of only two London boroughs to respond to that with its own business hardship fund. Yeah. There were a huge number of businesses, particularly again small and micro businesses, who weren't eligible for support through the schemes that were initially announced by government. The small business support scheme and the retail and hospitality schemes. We were cognizant of the fact that there were probably 11,500 small and micro businesses in Southwark who weren't eligible for support, either because they didn't occupy a premises, or their premises didn't have a rateable value, or they were a subtenant of another business, and so we were very keen to kind of plug that gap. So we made £2 million available through Southwark's business hardship fund, and that was the demand for that. Unexpected, as we expected, was huge. Unfortunately, it was fortunate that we were able to make that available, and £2 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you realise the scale of the challenge, it's not a huge amount of money. And we had to close 2 applications after a week because we were just inundated with applications. We are still working through those now because we received so many, but we're still getting grants out the door and awarding micro business of grants of up to £10,000 for businesses of up to 9 employees. We had to take some quite hard decisions with that fund, recognising the scale of the challenge. We wanted to kind of maximise the impact of the fund and make sure it went to the businesses that were struggling the most. And so we kind of had to apply some criteria to that fund. And we had to stick to that criteria to make sure it was fair for everybody, and that did mean that some other businesses weren't eligible, unfortunately. But even with a pot of funding around 2 million, we weren't going to be able to kind of support everyone. So
well, as you say, I mean, I think huge hats off to Southwark Council for making that fund available in the first place. As you say, it's not going to be possible, sadly, to support everybody. But I think the main thing is that you did do that. Now, we have just launched a confidence poll. We'd be really grateful if those of you that are watching this could just take a few moments to tell us how confident you're feeling as your business goes through this current crisis. We've been running these polls throughout the 8 weeks, and it's been really interesting to see how moods have changed. we have noticed in the last few weeks as we approach the coming out of lockdown that there's obviously, understandably, quite a bit of nervousness about that. Whereas we'd seen quite a big boost in confidence maybe a month ago now. There's just this nervousness at the moment that's making many businesses just question how confident they're feeling. So it'd be really helpful if you could share your thoughts by filling that in. Danny, I just wanted to come back to you on Roland, who's watching, had asked a question. He says it's about rates and council tax. I'm thinking that what he's asking, Roland, if you want to clarify, please feel free to do that. But I think he's asking potentially, is there a sort of deferment scheme? What is the stance that the local authorities are taking for small businesses who maybe are going to struggle to pay those at the moment?
Yeah. Well, there's the rate relief that was announced by the government, and that will of course be applied, and I think the intention is to apply that at source. Mm-hmm. For businesses though that haven't qualified for relief and are still liable for some kind of rates payment, my understanding is that if you are struggling to pay that demand, that you get in touch with the business rates team and discuss your case with them, and they will deal with you on a case by case basis. But we're not keen as a local authority in terms of sort of enforcement action and stuff like that at the moment. I understand that our business rates are being very flexible and supportive of businesses that are struggling to pay their business rates. So do get in touch with our business rates team if you are, as a small business, struggling to pay your business rates.
So just to reiterate again what we've already said, morning, which is this is about communicating. I know there probably are some frustrations. It's across the board of the most councils that we're talking with. Actually getting through to people is often a challenge. There's a huge workload that you and the team at the council are doing, and hats off to all of you because you've had a tremendous job to try and keep the whole borough moving. And I think it's easy to forget that key role that the council are playing, not just in terms of supporting businesses, but residents and the whole wider healthcare issue. So, huge thanks to everybody at the council for doing their bit there. I'm going to ask Alan just to come back in because, Alan, in terms of this whole issue of, what happens legally if you default on payment, and I know you wanted to bring up the issue of contracts as well. So if you're an SME and you're under contract with somebody, how is that currently being handled? Just talk to us a bit about that, if you will.
Sure. Obviously, the question of contracts is quite a big and complicated subject because there are numerous contracts, different contracts for each sector. But there are two sort of guiding, overarching principles, if you like, which you could consider looking at if you are having difficulties in performing a contract or paying for sums that are due. And the first is the question of whether the contract's been frustrated by the coronavirus. That frustration only applies where there's been a supervening event, for example, the virus which was unexpected and which was beyond the control of the parties, and as a result you've been unable to carry out, to fundamentally perform the contract. If you can establish frustration, then the effect of that is that the contract's going to be terminated completely, and all further obligations will not apply. However, it's quite difficult to establish frustration, and frustration of contracts will only normally apply where there are no contractual provisions. Usually there are what's called force majeure clauses. I mean, literally a superior force. So in most terms and conditions of contracts, there will be a force majeure clause, which deals with what will happen if there is a contractual, someone is not performing under the contract. Again, it's quite rigorous to establish that all of the conditions in force majeure apply. You have to show that one of the circumstances in the clause has occurred and that it was beyond the parties' reasonable control, and that all necessary or reasonable steps have been taken to try and avoid or mitigate the event. So I think the point is you need to look carefully at all of your terms and conditions of contracts if you're struggling and thinking to seeing whether you can avoid contractual obligations. You should also bear in mind an important point that most contracts are now regulated by statutory controls. So business to business contracts are subject to the Unfair Contract Terms Act 1973, which says that terms in the contract must be fair and reasonable. So you can't rely on some completely unreasonable term in the contract. And of course, if it's a business to consumer contract, you've also got the Consumer Rights Act and all the rights that are given to consumers as well. So I think for most businesses, what they need to be doing is reviewing their contract terms, not only in respect of existing contracts to see whether there is a get out, but moving forward and looking ahead, they would probably be well advised to review their terms as to future trading to make sure that events such as these unexpected events, which have suddenly hit everybody since February or whenever it first came to light, that those are covered by future terms and conditions.
Right. I think that word frustrated is a word that we can all relate to. I hadn't realised it was a legal term. Frustration is something that many of us have heard, but that's really helpful. Andrew from Preston Reeves, just wanted to come back to you. There is a question around, and hopefully you might be able to answer this, around the B-bills loans, and I guess it applies to C-bills as well, which is around this question: if in fact you've taken out a loan, you then find sadly that your business isn't going to make it through. We know that the government have backed these loans, but the question is particularly, do we know if there's going to be any suggestion that that loan would have to be paid back if your business goes under?
Okay, and I was looking at the question, and I think the question is relating to a sole trader business, so not a limited company based business, and certainly so the loan scheme that we're talking about here, I think with the limit of £50,000 is called the bounce back. It's known as the bounce back loan scheme. So that can be made available to self-employed businesses, sole traders. There is a proviso, I think, in the terms that say that it must be used for business purposes, not for personal purposes. And I think that with all of these schemes, whether it's the larger business interruption loans that are coming from the banks or the bounce back schemes, these are loans, and ultimately they have to be paid back. So the question of the government guaranteeing the loans, that guarantee is actually misunderstood sometimes, because actually it is only a loan, it's only a guarantee that can be called on if the bank can't get the money back from the business or that it's lent the money to. So in the first instance, what someone who is a sole trader has to think about is that if they take this bounce back loan in their own name to use for their business, then ultimately they have got to be able to repay that into the future. If, for example, they can't pay it back, I don't think it would be treated like a student loan, but certainly in this sort of environment and coming out of the crisis, I think everybody all the banks will be very empathetic to people having financial difficulties, but it's only if the bank concerned gets to the point where it knows that it can't recover any further money from the sole trader that it can go to the government and say, okay, well, we now need to call on you. So the government guarantee is very much a last resort for the bank, and it's the guarantee for the bank, so that the bank can get money back from the government.
Okay, so you have to expect that all reasonable measures will be taken by the bank to retrieve that loan over whatever period. So you shouldn't just expect that it's fine, you could walk away from it. There will be all the necessary measures that are going down.
That's right. And just very quickly on that, I mean, the banks are obviously, extremely concerned about their reputations. The banks are very unlikely to be sort of, getting aggressive and issuing bankruptcy petitions against people in this sort of situation. So there's certainly a conversation to have. But someone taking that loan should go in on the basis that they have to repay it at some point.
Okay, that's great. I've got a question which I don't know whether, Danny, you probably can't answer it on the spot, but maybe Andrew, you can give some insight. It's about someone's asking if they can get some more information on the additional funding that's going to be made available to businesses who don't currently qualify for the grant scheme. So I think this is the discretionary funding that councils have been given, and I know there's been a lot of talk about how that's, what the rules are going to be, and how actually each council can almost make up their own rules, or that sort of seems to be how it might have been. What is the latest update on that? And Danny, can I start with you? Have you got on that? I'll unmute you. There you go.
Thank you. Yes, you can. So government are very good at announcing schemes and then not providing local authorities with the technical guidance to implement those schemes. We received the final technical guidance yesterday. What we hope will be the final technical guidance anyway, and that they don't amend it any further. That means that we can now move forward with the process of implementing that scheme, and we hope to be able to announce what that scheme will look like locally, if not next week, the week after. I'm hoping next week, but don't hold me to that. There's an internal process that we need to go through. Southwark's allocation is 3.4 million, so it's a significant addition to the funding that we've already been awarding. Interestingly, and reassuringly for us, there's a huge amount of alignment between the government's discretionary scheme and what we've already been rolling out locally, which suggests we've been doing something right, at least. So that does mean that we are in a position to roll it out possibly sooner than a lot of other local authorities might be.
Okay, that's really helpful to know. I do have someone who's asked a question, who runs an African fashion business, clearly struggling, doesn't have a lot of faith that even after the lockdown is lifted, that she will be expecting any significant sales in the near future. Obviously really concerned about how she will personally survive as well as her business surviving. So Danny, is that the sort of person that's potentially fallen between the cracks a bit, and that's where this discretionary fund might work?
Absolutely that. Our existing business hardship fund and the new discretionary fund is specifically targeted at small and micro businesses who haven't been eligible for other forms of funding that have been announced by the government. So I can't comment on that individual case, but if as a business you fit within that category, then you are likely to be eligible. So please keep an eye on the council web pages for that announcement in the coming.
So Mary, I think that's something that definitely to take hopefully some heed from. Keep your eye on that, and hopefully you'll be applicable for that, and that will help you get through the immediate concerns that you have, and hopefully that works for you. Andrew, just coming back to you, obviously as of I think it was 9 o'clock this morning, we are all now involved in the test and trace initiative that the government's brought in. That has implications for employers and their employees, I imagine. What can you tell us about that?
Well, in particular, I mean, at any time, because the system is that these people who are managing the test and tracing scheme can pick the phone up at any time and tell people to isolate themselves for 14 days, and that can be at the drop of a hat. So potentially, depending on the numbers that are concerned, and they were talking the other day that there was many thousands each day when this is properly up and running around the country could happen. And because obviously we don't know how this, people talk about a second spike. Well, if the second spike involves this sort of scenario where test and tracing are happening, it'll mean that people will, at a drop of a hat, have to phone in if they have gone back to work to say, I can't come in. So employers then will have to think about how they cover that. So it's additional strain on the business, additional to covering holidays and sickness absences, for instance, potentially additional to sickness absence. But it's just something I think employers need to be aware of, particularly as it's up and running now. And whenever we get back to business and people are in, at a drop of a hat they can, so they need to be wary of how they're going to be able to manage that.
But presumably if someone is told that they have to isolate for 14 days because they're part of the they've been picked up as in the tracing, that would still enable them to work, albeit from home. It wouldn't be that they're not necessarily ill, so it wouldn't be that they would have to be obliged to take 2 weeks off. They would presumably, if they could work from home,
yeah,
they would
I'm talking about people who are going, who are not working from home. I'm thinking about businesses that are up and running and people having to travel into London because they've maybe opened up an office or they're a retail outlet. I think it's those sort of people where, people haven't been furloughed, they're out of furlough or they're not working from home particularly. It's just about a drop of a hat, they can actually just phone in and say, I've been told to isolate for 14 days.
Yeah, okay.
And it could be that that could be repeated. It's not only could be 14 days, it could go back to work and suddenly it could happen again. There's another 14 days. That's
I mean, it's another of these things which obviously has been announced with not a lot of clarity, mainly because no one knows. It's another of these, we've got to wait and see scenarios. What impact will that have? Hopefully the right impact in terms of containing the virus, but what the implication has for businesses is yet to be seen. Jennifer, I'm going to bring you in because this must be a concern for you. I know you've got 70 employees you mentioned currently furloughed. You're looking to unfurlough them. You might be seeing them not being able to work again.
Yeah, and it's that kind of, when those kind of messages come through, the little panic button starts to go again in my head. And I think because there's so many unknowns and so many variables, if you sit and panic and worry about all of them, then it's just it's not helpful. It's not going to lead anywhere. And you just have to think, well, I just have to deal with that when it comes. I don't know what the extent of that will be. I will manage it when it does happen. But we can only deal with all of these new challenges that come along as they come along. And, for me, get yourself a dog and go dog walking or do meditation. That's good as well. But don't panic is the key, I think.
Jane, I think that's really, really helpful information, because certainly if you did stop and think about everything, you would get yourself in a real spin and then you can't actually do anything helpful. So taking each day as it comes. I'm going to come back to Andrew from Creston Reeves on that subject, because certainly part of planning your restructuring, planning the future must be about keeping calm, keeping your head in the right place. I just also wanted to, we had a quick question come in, which was about, can you apply for both a CBILS and a BBILS loan? I think the answer is no. I think it's one or the other. Is that right, Andrew?
That is absolutely right. It's one or the other. I think that if you had a CBILS loan and you were able to replace that with a bounce back loan because it was better terms, I think you can do that. But certainly the two are mutually exclusive. So yes, but totally agree about de-stressing and calming down. In the line of work that I do, I do deal with clients in crisis an awful lot, and I think the first of all is yes, certainly that sort of meditation. I'm a great believer in meditation and that sort of mindfulness. But I think also talking to somebody and talking to somebody who you can pick up the phone to and just talk through your issues, whether it's a professional advisor or whether it's just a friend, invaluable.
Yeah, I would second that, and I think that this is very much what today has been about. This is about bringing you people that you can talk to, that will listen, and hopefully this morning has been helpful in terms of sharing some of the insight. We will be sharing people's contact details from this with all of you, and I'm sure all of our panelists would be happy to pick up with you individually if you've got particular concerns. I think the message from Southwark Chamber and from Southwark Council and generally the Southwark business community is everybody is in this together, and that you can take a lot of, I think, strength from that actually this isn't anything that anybody individually has done. We are all in this together, and together we can all come out of it, but it is how we work as a collective. And I know that Les would share that, and just to reiterate, that's the role of any chamber, and particularly Southwark Chamber, to be here supporting all of you businesses. Hopefully you found this morning useful, and you can look back at this video by going onto the Southwark Chamber's website. We will be uploading this, so if there was something you missed, then you can do that, and do pass this information on to others. We will be circulating the information to all of you that are watching at home. And also want to give a shout out to the next Southwark Chamber event that is being run, which is a virtual networking event. It's speed networking. We held the first one on behalf of Southwark Chamber a few weeks back. And in June, we do have another one coming forward in exactly this format, in a Zoom format. It's actually a great way to network. It's a great way to get strength from other people. Actually hearing other people's stories is really helpful. And I know you'll be very uplifted if you can join us on that one. Just checking the date now. It's the 11th of June. It's at 8:30 until 9:30 on this Zoom platform. If you go to thebigbreakfast.org.uk, you'll see all of the dates. And I would encourage you to support that too. So for this morning, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our panellists, to Jennifer O'Donnell from Jane Jefferson Cleaning, to Alan Zeffart from Anthony Gold Solicitors, to Andrew Tate from Creston Reeves, to Andrew Sharnock from the HR department, to Danny Edwards from Southwark Council, and Les Chamber, Chair of the Southwark Chamber. On behalf of all of them, thank you for listening. Hopefully you found this helpful, and please stay well, enjoy the sunshine, and hope to see you very soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.